Hello, Year 10. This lesson is about the detailed structure of the alveolus. You need to turn to page 18 in your book, and you should see an image on the page in black and white of a single alveolus. And when scientists draw this on the board, they start off, as I am here, showing the end of the bronchiole, and then the alveolus itself is like a sac. So this is our bronchiole here, and the circular part is the alveolus itself. Now, scientists often will show the alveolus as being very, very delicate and very thin, and having a wall that is basically one cell thick. So each of these is supposed to represent a little cell. So you can imagine a very, very thin, delicate structure made of one cell thick. So there would be a nuclei in each of these cells going around the edge of the alveolus. So that's the basic structure of the alveoli, and there are millions of these making up the lungs. Surrounding all of the alveoli, and the reason why the lungs look so reddy pink, is you have a very, very narrow blood vessel called a capillary. And these capillaries surround the alveoli in a network. And again, capillaries are so tiny that normally only one red blood cell can travel at a time through them. And they also are only one cell thick. So it makes the distance that the gases have got to travel across from the alveoli into the blood very, very small. So here is our very delicate capillary running right next to our alveoli. Okay, so each of these would be one cell thick. And we have our red blood cells travelling along this narrow capillary. And as the blood comes into the lungs, it is what we call deoxygenated. In other words, it contains very little oxygen. So it's come from the body where all the oxygen has been used up, and it's coming into the lungs, and hopefully it's going to start to pick up oxygen here. Now, one final part of the alveoli, just as a physical structure, is on the inside lining the alveoli. You wouldn't expect this, but there is a thin layer of moisture. And most people would say, well, hang on a second, if there's moisture or water inside the lungs, surely we'd drown. This is such a thin layer, and it's there to help the gases dissolve in the moisture to help them travel across the alveolus. And they travel across the alveolus by what we call diffusion. So basically, we're breathing in and out, and we've got this kind of pumping action of replacing the air at the surface of gas exchange. So our alveolus, our single alveoli here, or single alveolus, is our structure of gas exchange. So as we breathe in, oxygen comes into our mouth and our nose, down the trachea, down the bronchi, down into the bronchioles, down towards the alveoli where it's got this massive surface area for gas exchange. And there are more oxygen molecules, let's say on this side, inside the alveolus, okay, than there are in the blood cells. So there's not very much oxygen at all. So going back to what we learned in the first unit, oxygen passes across, dissolves in this moisture, and then travels by diffusion through the very thin one cell thick wall of the alveolus, across the tiny gap that is this capillary is very close to the alveolus so that it doesn't have to travel very far, across the one cell wall of the capillary, and is picked up by our red blood cell there. So now our blood becomes what we call oxygenated. In other words, got plenty of oxygen to carry off around the body to where it's required. Now, this deoxygenated blood that's coming in to our lungs here has got quite a lot of carbon dioxide. So because I can't write the word fully in there, I'm going to put the formula. Carbon dioxide is made by respiration, and obviously we want to get rid of it. So if there's a high level of carbon dioxide here in the blood, so that's my little red dots, but there's not very much here in the alveoli, it's going to pass by diffusion along the concentration gradient through the capillary wall, through the little gap between the alveolus and the capillary, through the alveoli wall, dissolve in the moisture, and carbon dioxide is going to be removed out that direction. So this is what we call the exchange of gases. Now, the alveoli are adapted. That word adaptation, okay, means a feature that helps whatever it is, it might be a whole organism or it might be a structure, to do its job. So the job of the alveoli is to exchange gases. So how are they adapted to do this job? Well, first of all, there's lots of them, okay? If we've got lots of alveoli, millions of them, that gives us a huge surface area. Huge surface area means more gases can be exchanged at any one breath in and breath out. If you imagine there's millions of these making up the lung structure, yeah, it has a huge area. We have the thin wall of the alveolus. Only one cell thick means that there's less distance for our gases to travel across. We have the thin layer of moisture, allows the gases to dissolve. Dissolved gases travel by diffusion a little bit easier. Good morning, Year 10. This lesson is about the structure of the alveolus and the adaptations that allow it to maximise gas exchange. So a quick recap of what we've learnt previously. In the lungs, the lung structure, we take air in through our mouth and our nose. A tube called the trachea links the mouth and the nose down towards the lungs. This trachea then splits into two tubes called the bronchi. One on its own is called a bronchus, and these tubes go to both the left and to the right lung. The bronchi then split even further, a little bit like branches of a tree, and become these bronchioles that you can see here in the PowerPoint. The bronchioles narrow and get thinner and thinner, and at the very ends we can see these structures here, which are the alveoli. They look a little bit like bunches of grapes. They are very, very thin structures, they're very delicate, and there are millions of them that make up the lungs here. So it maximizes the surface area for gas exchange. So that's one of the key features. We can also see in this diagram blood vessels represented in different colours here, and the reason why scientists often colour the blood vessels in blue and red. Blue denotes normally blood that is what we call deoxygenated. Deoxygenated blood contains very little oxygen. So we can see our small pulmonary artery coming in here, bringing in the deoxygenated blood. And as it passes over the alveoli, so you've got this very vast network of very thin capillaries surrounding every part of the alveoli so that they can get the oxygen out of the air and into the blood, they start to turn red. So red indicates now that the blood is oxygenated. In other words, it's picked up the oxygen and it's passing it back up, you can see here, through the small pulmonary vein, so it can be transported around the body and dropped wherever it's needed for respiration. At the same time the oxygen is passing into the blood, in these alveoli you have what we call gas exchange. So oxygen passes in, and carbon dioxide, which we have made by respiration, is going to be passing out of the blood and back into the alveoli so it can be breathed out. The picture on the right here just zooms in a little bit so we can see the detailed structure here, and we can see our blood flow going from blue deoxygenated, the purpley pink as it starts to pick up oxygen, and then fully oxygenated flowing back up past our bronchioles here. And this little section just here zooms in on where we can see the actual surface of our gas exchange. So our alveoli is so delicate and thin, the lining of it literally has 1 cell thick, we can see. We can see the capillary next to it, and you'll see this in the diagram on the next slide in a second, also is only 1 cell thick, and we can see thin enough that only 1 red blood cell at a time can pass along there. Oxygen is going to diffuse from the air in the alveolus to the blood, particularly being picked up by the red blood cells. So red blood cells contain a pigment called hemoglobin. They combine with the oxygen to make oxyhemoglobin, but carbon dioxide is not carried by red blood cells. Carbon dioxide is carried in the plasma, the liquid part of the blood, and that passes in the opposite direction. So if we cast our minds back to diffusion in the first unit booklet that we did, the reason why the oxygen passes from here in the alveoli into the blood is there would be more oxygen here in the alveolus, less in the blood. So it passes from high to low concentration, down a concentration gradient to be picked up by the blood, and the opposite with carbon dioxide. There would be more carbon dioxide here and less inside the alveolus, so it passes from high to low concentration gradient, down a concentration gradient into the alveoli so that we can get rid of it. Now, on page 18 in your booklet, if you turn the page sideways, you should be able to see the structure of an alveolus. And so we can see your picture is black and white. I'm going to show you in colour what it looks like. So you can see the structure of the alveoli just here. And we can see that the blood cells have actually been coloured blue and then pink and red as they start to pick up the oxygen. Now your diagram has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes around the outside. And we need to add some labels to the outside of this box, okay? So I'm going to go back to my original page. So end show. And you should be able to see our boxes on here. Now each box I've coloured in a different colour, and each of these 6 boxes is a key feature and adaptation that allows the alveolus to maximise gas exchange. So I need you to add these labels to your diagram. So up the top here, we can see in this yellow box, this is the first key feature. Although the lumen is the hole in the middle of the alveolus, this part here. Even though the lumen is very small, there are millions of these alveoli, creating a huge surface area for gas exchange. And the example we often use with students, just to give you an idea of how much area there is for gas exchange in your lungs, despite your lungs really only being about the size of rugby balls, if we were to take every single little alveoli and squish it flat a bit like bubble wrap and put them all next to one another, they would take up the surface area of the tennis courts. That is how much surface area you have in your lungs. We also know that there are many capillaries covering the outer surface of the alveolus. So we can see this pink structure here. That means there's a really good blood supply to be able to pick up the oxygen from the alveoli into the blood and also exchange the carbon dioxide in the opposite direction. We know that the walls of the capillary are literally 1 cell thick. Can you see here, these little pale brown structures are the cells making up the wall of the alveoli. And they are also got a little nuclei in each cell. And the walls of the capillary as well as the alveolus, okay, are only 1 cell thick. Notice how close the capillary actually hugs the alveolus as well. So there's a very short distance, okay, for the gases to actually travel across. Shorter distance means less time for diffusion, faster rates of diffusion. We can see that the cells in the alveoli wall also secrete a fluid, a little bit of moisture. So you can see just here, the blue outline on the inside of the alveoli there is to keep the walls moist. And the reason why this helps diffusion is gases dissolve in this moisture. So the oxygen, as it's passing through, will dissolve in the moisture to help it travel across. And in the opposite direction, so will the carbon dioxide. It also prevents the sides of the alveoli from sticking together, so it makes them more balloon shaped, so it maximises their surface area. The final two labels that are on this diagram are this one in the middle, the red one. So oxygen is high in concentration in the alveolus compared to the capillary. So it's going to diffuse from here where it's high to here where it's low into the red blood cells. Remember, they are going to carry the oxygen in the hemoglobin. And the carbon dioxide diffuses in the opposite direction. So it's high in the capillary, where it's come from the rest of the body, where it's been made as a waste product in respiration, and it's going to diffuse into the alveoli. So pause the video, and I would like you to make sure that you add these labels to your diagram of the alveolus on page 18. Now, just to recap, on our next slide, I've put the features of the alveoli clearly here for you to see them. So lots of them, of alveoli, to increase surface area. They have a cluster of grapes-like structure, again to increase the surface area. They have a very good network of blood capillaries surrounding them so that more oxygen can pass into the blood and carbon dioxide can pass out. The capillaries are very thin, they're only 1 cell thick, so there's less distance for gases to pass through. The alveoli wall is also very thin, 1 cell thick, so there's less distance for gases to pass through. The capillaries are very close to the alveoli. As I said, they hug them really tightly to reduce the distance for gases to travel. And the final one is that there is a thin layer of moisture lining the alveoli for the gases to dissolve in. Now, on the next page, on page 20, there is another diagram for you to label up to see if you can put these features, as we've talked about previously, onto our diagram, along with the labels for oxygenated blood, deoxygenated blood, onto that diagram. But the main task for this lesson now is for you to create a piece of extended writing. And the extended writing is going to be describing in detail the features of the alveolus and explaining how each of these features make the alveolus good at exchanging gases. This would be what we call a quality of written communication question that we find in the exam papers, and they are worth 6 marks. What's really important to note with these questions is that the examiners are not only looking at the content that you're including, but they're also looking at your ability to use correct English, okay? So capital letters at the start of sentences, full stops at the end, correct punctuation, correct spelling. So at the bottom of page 20, and it goes over the page to page 21, you have got some space to be able to write this. What I don't want from you is a list with bullet points like you can see on the screen currently. I do want what we call extended prose, so extended sentences. So you might start off your essay with some of the features that we can see in the alveoli that enable it to be efficient at gas exchange and maximising gas exchange and then rather than a big list, write in sentences. Don't forget the need for punctuation. Particularly, you may want to chunk this up into, say, 1 or 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs even, okay, to describe each of the features and how it helps them. So don't forget the need for good written English, okay, in your response, and the use of key scientific vocabulary. So pause the video and you can start to write your answer to your QWC question in your booklet. Thank you. So the final task for today is on page 22. You have got the diagram that we saw previously, this diagram that is here at the top. And this is not a QWC question. This is just a summary style question to find out, can you use all of your knowledge that you've learnt so far about the structure of the respiratory system to describe in detail the route an oxygen molecule may take from being inhaled in the mouth to being picked up by a red blood cell. So what I want here is I do want a paragraph, but it's not extended prose, okay? And in my paragraph, I would like you to start off with the oxygen molecule being by the mouth and the nose and the route it takes in, okay, to get into the bloodstream. So if we go all the way back to our upper respiratory tract, if our oxygen molecule is here, you can describe its route through the nose or through the mouth, down through the trachea. It then goes into the lower respiratory tract, down through the larynx and the trachea. It splits, it might go left or it might go right to the bronchi, left or right bronchus. It splits even further to the bronchioles. It ends up at the ends of the alveoli, and then we have it actually exchanging the oxygen going into the blood and being picked up by the red blood cells and exchanging with the carbon dioxide. So that is your last task for today. Thank you.